Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back, and I'm gonna go over quickly, maybe not quickly, but I'm gonna go over the most recent council vote that we did, involving 9 total Pokemon. We had votes on Drampa, Duraludon, EXEGGUTOR, Alola, Frostmoth, Haunter, Brabombi, Sneasel, Tauros, and Vikavolt. And I want to give some commentary as to why each of these Pokemon was nominated, why they were banned or weren't banned. Probably will try to fit in there somewhere. Probably also give some commentary about the votes that I did in specific, because I think that's relevant. So first we had Drampa, and I'm gonna cover. I'll cover Drampa, Duraludon, and Eggy all in one. Basically, these all got nominated because they hit hard as hell. They're really hard to switch into. You know, Draco Meteor. I believe Duraludon is the weakest out of all of them at base 120 special attack. Yeah, that weakest, by the way, 120 still. While Drampa sits at like 135 or something. It's crazy. All these are just hard to switch into. They can pressure checks pretty decently well. Duraludon probably to the worst extent, but Duraludon makes up for its inability to reliably hit steel types by having a much better speed tier. Having base 85 speed is just really nice for how strong it is. Then we go to Frostmoth. This one, when I saw it numbed, I was a little bit surprised, but most of it has to do with a lot of the steel types in the tier don't actually resist ice. And so after a Quiver Dance, this thing's already really strong. And so after one, it becomes really hard to deal with defensively. Ice plus grass coverage in a lot of matchups ends up being pretty decent. And the steel types that we do end up having, some of them aren't the hardest to pressure, at least, like Silvally Steel. And so it's not too hard to find endgame situations in which after a Quiver Dance you potentially just clean with this. Haunter, pretty much the same deal as the Dragons, it's just really hard to switch into. It was originally banned because it was just too strong. The tier was also a lot slower at that point. And while the tier may have gotten faster now, and we do have a couple new potential checks like Gastrodon, Haunter's coverage and power is just so fucking good. So we all felt that it probably needs to get dealt with again. Rabombi, I think it's mostly just choice spec sets. You can cripple a lot of your checks, bar like Silvally Steel with Trick. You're not the weakest ever if you lose your item. You're not strong, but you can still throw off decently powered Moonblasts. So we had that there. Quiver Dance and Sticky Web sets maybe have potential, but it was mostly specs that we voted based on. It's also fast as hell. I think it's third fastest unboosted mon on the tier behind a Selgor and Jolteon, if I'm remembering correctly. And we have Sneasel. It's fast as hell, strong as hell. Knockoff's a bitch to switch into. Tauros, it's fast as hell, strong as hell. Every move's a bitch to switch into, and it has really good coverage between close combat and throat chop. And workup sets are also a pain in the ass, which just makes it even more annoying. And a lot of its checks also just don't have good recovery. So you hit Rhydon with a close combat once and it pretty much isn't a check anymore. And in Vikavolt, it's really strong and it's got really good defensive tools based on its typing and its ability. Levitate lets it switch into a lot of random ground type attacks from foes like Rhydon, which you can potentially outspeed an Oko with Energy Ball. You can set a sub up on a lot of stuff as well. You've got Roost for longevity, so you can use it to continuously check Pokemon like, say, Scarf Togedemaru, for example. That's really the only thing coming to my head at the moment. Oh my god. But yeah, so as we can see here, the 3 bans we ended up with were Tauros, Haunter, and Eggy Alola. And so I want to kind of talk about some of these Pokemon in comparison to the similar ones. So Eggy Alola in comparison to Drampa and Duraludon. Why did we ban it? But we didn't ban, say, Drampa, because that's the really easy comparison there. You know, they're both slow wall breakers, literally slow dragon wall breakers. They both have pretty good defensive tools. But why Eggy get banned? And, convincingly Drampa wasn't banned. Convincingly Eggy was banned. So the reason, and this also goes into how I voted, right? Eggy Alola is more of a problem than Drampa, mostly because of how Eggy's got access to Leaf Storm. So Drampa's stab attacks both have immunities, and so choice spec sets aren't as problematic in my eyes compared to Eggy Alola, as you can potentially pivot around it. Now, obviously, trying to pivot around, you know, strong Dracos, Hyper Voices, and even Flamethrowers, if the Drampa decides to just mid-ground it, isn't easy at all. But it's possible. And I also think that in comparison to when we had Drampa back in April, we still do have a lot of the same Pokemon that can, like, soft check it. Like, say, Galarfisk and Clefairy. Note how I say soft check. One correct prediction, Drampa is like 2-hit KOing those. But Alola is just so much more difficult to deal with because of how much stronger it is by virtue of that Leaf Storm. And what I mean by that is, Clefairy just dies to Leaf Storm, I believe. Choice Specs Leaf Storm is... It may not be a guaranteed OHKO, but it's doing, like, upwards of 90-something%. So, you know, you get hit by that once, you're gone. Galarfisk, obviously, can't take that either. And the big thing about just having that one spammable stab attack means that you always will make some sort of progress. I think Alola is a lot more punishing to play around as a result, because you have to make so many more proper predictions. It does suffer from the similar trends that we've seen in the meta, as Drampa does, such as, you know, we have Whimsicott around now, we have Ribombee around now, we have just a lot of steel types in general around now. But I do find it that Eggy can break through them a lot more efficiently. And I also think Eggy, there's something to say about Eggy's, like, utility beyond just choice spec sets, or set potential beyond those. I know some people have talked about Life Orb, so that's still pretty much just as strong, but you can switch up moves, so you're not being punished by things like Ferroseed coming in at all. Things like Sylvali's Steel, yeah, they can still switch into you, but they don't threaten to OHKO you. Maybe they weaken you and take you out of commission for the rest of the game, but, like, might be all you need to open up a Frostmoth sweep or something. And I also really think Trick Room sets are a problem. I am so sorry for that awkward pause. I think Trick Room sets are a problem, too. The Mon has such limited defensive counterplay if you get that room up. Limited counterplay in general, really. You've got, like, Sneasel Ice Shard, I guess, if you want to talk about revenge killing reliably, but the Mon is just still so strong under a room. It doesn't require too much chip on potential checks. I do think there end up being a few more checks if you run Trick Room on Eggy. Things like Aromatisse can take a single hit, but it's just so hard to deal with at any point in the game. And it also removes a lot of counterplay, right? You set up the room, well, now things like Haunter can't revenge kill you, things like Ribombee can't revenge kill you, things like Vikavolt maybe can't revenge kill you. I don't know how the speed works with those two. I think Eggy's a little faster. But I do know people have run Timid Vikavolt in the past, and I haven't seen any Timid Eggies throughout its time that it was in the tier. It's just mostly a matter of you are getting a whole bunch of extra room to just wall break by guaranteeing that you will always be faster. The damage decrease does suck, but when I played into it and used it a little bit, it felt more than worth it. And the comparison between Eggy and Duraludon's a little bit weird because, you know, fast wall breaker versus slow wall breaker. I really think you can make just two very distinct claims about why Eggy was viewed as better than Duraludon. And its defensive utility and coverage. Eggy can hit steel types. Duraludon can't. Unless you're running like Iron Defense Body Press, Duraludon's Dracos don't do that much to a lot of steel types. I think Galarfisk takes like 33, 34-ish max from Draco. It's not very tasking to ask to take a couple of those, you know? Especially if you have like an Aromatisse with a easy Witch support. But Eggy can just immediately drop it with Leaf Storm. And I say drop it, it's not going to OHKO, but it's going to do a lot more than those Dracos. And when we talk about defensive utility, Duraludon, I voted for a Duraludon ban. I'm starting to think maybe even like part of it's also just like the removal of Alola helps open up other like checks to general dragon types. Like Galarfisk is even more convincing of a check now instead of like having to rely on Clefairy, which makes Duraludon worse. I think that like conclusion is clear enough. But Duraludon's defensive utility in comparison to Eggy's is just so much worse. Steel Dragon, offensively, is pretty cool, but when you put it together, it opens up so many holes. Your Dragon type that doesn't check Fire types. Your Steel type that doesn't check Fairy types. And it also just has, like, that special bulk ends up being so just painful to build with. Like, the typing in general is just painful to build with if you're trying to use this as, like, a specs wall breaker of sorts. It's like, you have to make all these weird just concessions. Say, alright, well, I will be weaker to Fairy types than I would like to be. I will be weaker to Fire types than I would like to be. I don't feel like building coherent teams with Duraludon is very easy unless you just go, like, alright, HO lead. It's just... I don't like how much you have to give up while building to get a good amount of run with Duraludon. It can feel really awkward. I do have, like, a team that I've been trying to get to work with building with Eternally some, and, like, it still feels so awkward to make good use of if you're trying to use it as a standalone breaker. Which is why I end up thinking Duraludon on paper is really problematic, despite having, like, some really defined checks. But in practice, it's so much easier to deal with because, like, the team you're up against is just going to be worse. Which is why I think maybe, like, what Hoen's been using, where he's just running lead Duraludon on HO, maybe that's just the way to go. Like, and then it doesn't matter if you've got defensive holes. It's HO. You're mostly just trying to cover them with, like, I don't know, offensive pressure anyway. You're just trying to have, like, those soft checks. You're not trying to build, like, again, like a coherent, really well glued together team. It's just compared to Eggy, who, like, yeah, it's got some awful weaknesses, like the times 4 to ice sucks. Its bulk's not amazing, but you've got some really defined opportunities to switch in against, like, ground types, water types. Similar to Drampa on that, pretty much if a water type ever comes out, Eggy Alola's getting a free switch in. Which is how you can get, like, some really nasty aggressive doubles going. Kind of switches into electric types as well. Like, Rotom doesn't want an Eggy Alola coming in. You're not Oko that with Shadow Ball even if you're Specs. Eggy pretty much just combines... I guess it doesn't really matter combining. Eggy pretty much just takes everything that Drampa has and amplifies it a little bit more at the cost of a very minor power decrease. Now, obviously, I did talk about Eggy Alola's set diversity a little bit with, like, Trick Room and Life Orb being alternative options to Specs. So let's say that Drampa doesn't have other options that it can go with too. I used that, like, Boots set. I think Boots is just a cool item on it in general, opening up options like Calm Mind with the Roost. Defog sets are probably reliable too, like Glare. You could probably make, like, good use of Drampa's defensive utility to check stuff like Rotom and Decidueye. I do think Eggy Alola just takes everything that Drampa wants to do and pushes it even further, and it just, like, makes up for issues Duraludon has. I don't think the speed ends up being too big of a deal a lot of the time with Duraludon. It is useful, obviously, right? Like, say something like Decidueye, that doesn't threaten to revenge kill you if you're chipped, because, you know, you just come in and you want to press Draco, you can press Draco. But I think the bulk decrease really sucks. Now we can look at Haunter. Again, I pretty much already talked about this, but if we're looking at the tier right now, how do you deal with Life Orb Haunter besides outspeeding it? I don't see a way. I guess if you perfectly pivot around it, maybe you can? But even then, like, something like Miltank, you have to earn, like, Duty Thunder Wave to actually do anything back to Haunter, and that just makes you so much worse off. Not being able to poison Pokemon makes Miltank really passive. Means also things like Rotom just always take advantage of you. Ghost types in general just become a lot more of an issue, even with T-Wave, because you don't have that Great Wave hitting on something like Vikavolt. Even, like, letting that in for free is terrible, especially when Miltank does have some potential to at least give it issues. If you can get that Toxic off, maybe I know you can, from past generations. You can stall out some time versus it. But Haunter just... it's so strong with Life Orb and its coverage. And it's like, yeah, Haunter's frail as fuck, so maybe you're going like, okay, well, just don't let it in. It has 3 immunities, man, and they're not exactly uncommon. For Amon frail as Haunter is, it's got a lot of like deceptively decent defensive utility. Like obviously, yeah, you don't want to switch it in like a Rabombi Moonblast or something, but you can get it in versus Rhydon if you predict the Earthquake. You can get it in versus a Toxicroak if you predict the Focus Blast or even a Sludge Bomb, frankly. It's just, it has, for Amon as frail as it has far too many chances to get in, and it's also just fast enough to where it threatens a lot of the common mons in the tier. Despite the tier getting faster and faster, base 95 is still really good. I also do think that Haunter benefits from things like Skuntank and Sylvally Dark not being that common right now, at least from what I've seen. I think Sylvally Dark in general just kind of sucks right now. That's a story for another time. Yeah, Haunter's just doing the same thing that it did as previous. I do think that some sets are worse than they were back then. Like, I think Scarf Haunter is a lot worse. And again, that mostly has to do with the tier being, like, higher power levels, so Scarf Haunter's damage output isn't as, like, damning as it used to be. I think Scarf is really underwhelming. When I played into it, it just felt like, wow, this doesn't do damage. But offensive, more, like, the very offensive dedicated sets, like Life Orb, Pain. And we have Tauros as the last one, which, obviously we don't have a great comparison for it to other Pokemon, but I can kind of look at it in relation to Sneasel and Rabombi. In terms of, it's a fast wall breaker, and it's very, like, easy for it to just cripple its checks or just whittle them down. So, like, Rhydon, Stunfisk Galar, Mudsdale, these all sound like great checks, but Mudsdale doesn't have great recovery, and so even though it can take, like, the body slams, if you have, like, a single spike up, it's switching in maybe once or twice. And it doesn't really force you out too well either, because Taurus' physical bulk is oddly decent. I think it's like 80, 100 or something, or 180. Around there, probably. And with how fast it is, revenge killing it isn't as easy as you'd like it to be, because sure, you've got things like Whimsicott and Specs or Bombi. Those could revenge kill you, but the pool ain't very large. And if you look at it in relation to Sneasel, I think the main thing really does just come down to defensive, like, decent defensive utility. Sneasel's so frail, it dies to a slight gust of wind, you know? Like, it's really not that hard, I think, to punish Sneasel if it's trying to make these weird aggressive switches in, because it just doesn't have the bulk to afford it. It could take some weaker hits, but that's about it. And something like Rabombi, Endless House has to do with Sneasel as well. They're both hazard weak as all hell. I know some people like to talk about Boots Sneasel. I haven't used it. On paper it sounds kind of bad, but I'm not going to call it bad because I haven't used it yet. But those being weak to hazards makes it so much harder for them to consistently just come in whenever they want. Whereas with Tauros, it's not weak to hazards, so it's not as punished by the stacking. I also don't think it's the worst thing ever to remove hazards in the meta right now, so that's not like a huge issue for Rabombi and Sneasel, right? But it is something that Tauros has over them. Tauros is also just like a lot stronger. I don't remember its exact attack stat, it might be like 110, but Sheer Force Body Slam, Life Orb, hurts like a bitch, and it's real nice to not have to lock yourself into a move, right? Sneasel or Rabombi, again, assuming non-boots Sneasel, we're assuming CB, yeah, they're strong as hell. They have pretty no drawback moves, but at the very least, you could scout them with like moves like Protect if you have it, or just like if you have a decent mid-ground Pokemon to switch into them, you can figure out what they're trying to do at least. With Tauros, it's like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna switch it to Body Slam. Oh, and now it can use whatever other move it wants still. You know, I get my Stunfisk and, oh, it might just close combat. I get my, I don't know, Rotom. I get my Rotom in, it's might use Throat Chop. And it's just also knowing that Tauros it has like a lot of flexibility with its moveset. It can flex that work up in the last slot, because normal Fighting Dark is super good coverage. Don't really need anything else. So that just makes it even worse to play into, because Rhydon gets close combated once. Maybe a bulky set isn't to it KO'd, but I guarantee you that if you switch into it again and it works up, you are getting KO'd from whatever range you're at after that first CZ. And like, Sneasel can run S&D if you want to like look at comparisons. But I don't know how great that sounds. Having to waste a time, or waste a turn, I mean, to set up with Sneasel does sound rough when I'd rather just be knocking items. And then I've talked about Quiver Dancer Bombi a lot. I think it's awful. I don't like how weak it is. And it's part of the reason that I don't view like Spectre Bombi even as like the most damning Pokemon in the tier. Yeah, it's fast as hell and still not the worst off if you trick away your specs, but man, trick away your specs sucks. And if we were to look at, you know, Quiver Dancer power levels, that's after you've tricked off your specs. Same deal, except without a Pokemon crippled by having your specs. It's just even worse off. It does let you rub boots under Bombi, and that's nice, but that's really all I can give it. That's nice. And I'll talk about, like, I guess the mons that I did vote ban on. Duraludon, I did mention some. At the time, I think it's mostly because of, like, threat overload, so Duraludon felt a lot better in comparison because of the speed. I don't think I'd vote ban on it now. It just felt like, damn, it's got a strong Draco and it's fast, must be OP. And it did feel a little bit broken in practice, but as I've tried building with it more, it's just like, wow, this mon has so much opportunity cost. So I don't feel strongly about that now. Vikavolt I still feel very strongly about. I think this mon just doesn't have reliable defensive counterplay at all. And not really that much offensive either. You know, we don't really have rock types. At least not ones that outspeed Vikavolt. And the mons that, like, sort of check it defensively don't do it very convincingly. Even something like Togedemaru, if you're sub-roost, which is a set that I think needs to be used a lot more, you just beat defensive Togedemaru. And it's not like Scarf is, like, threatening you with anything either. Sub helps obviously prevent random Toxics from hitting you from mons like Togedemaru, Miltank even. Just makes it a lot easier to play around a lot of the more passive mons that don't have a great way of immediately forcing damage onto you. And of course, when you do get those random, like, bits of chip thrown your way, you do have Roost. So I don't know. I don't think anything's really changed for Vikavolt since it was last year, other than the meta being a little bit faster. So I guess, yeah, there are more fast Pokemon that can force damage onto it, but I don't really view that as holding it back. I thought Vikavolt was really broken when I originally voted to ban it, and I still pretty much feel the same way. I don't think anything's changed, so yeah, get rid of it. I think that's going to be it for me here, though. I still think we probably need to get rid of a few Pokemon. This guy right here. And maybe, like, some of these other ones on here do feel a bit more, like, oppressive. Just, like, maybe Drampa feels better now with Eggy gone, because, again, this kind of just takes the spotlight from Drampa in some ways. Maybe Ribombee and Sneasel feel better now with Tauros not competing with them, and even Haunter to a lesser extent. Maybe with one of the dragons gone, Frostmoth. This could go either better or worse, because I did talk about how Steel types are a lot better now with Eggy Alola gone. Just because, like, Gallerfisk, Silvally Steel, Togedemaru, they won't be, like, getting as pressured as much, I feel, in games. Obviously, like, maybe you just replace Eggy with Drampa, then the same thing happens. Frostmoth still gets those late game setup opportunities. But, I don't know, maybe you see a little bit less dragon usage overall, which as a result makes it harder for Frostmoth to have teammates just breaking holes for it to sweep late. I think that's gonna be it for me though. Been a couple days since I've been uploading. I just needed to take a few days to gather myself. We good. We're doing good. That's gonna be it for me for now. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.